There's something quite interesting behind me. I know, you can't avert your eyes from me, really. There's a whole range of P3 paints. This is a new paint range that was released about 9 months ago by Steamforged Games. It's a reformulation and re-release of a classic paint range that a lot of people have a lot of love for. Steamforged Games sent me this entire paint range, but they also sent me P3 Wave 2, which is coming to Gamefound on July 22nd. Now, this video is sponsored by Steamforged Games, and this isn't... I used to love P3 paints back in the day, and they're back and better than ever, because I didn't really use P3 paints back in the day. When it comes to painting, I'm not I'm gonna go enter Golden Demon and spend 75 hours painting a shoe. I'm just a guy who likes painting and likes using paint ranges. But enough chit chat, I want to tell you about what I'm painting today. But first, we need to clear up my desk from the last project. Handheld USB charge Hoover. Best thing I ever bought. But with a brand new mat, I wanted to build something that I've been planning for a little while. You might remember in one of my previous videos, I went to the UK Games Expo and bought this dragon by Archon Studios. And I was like, that would be a really cool dragon for the old world. So let's find out if I was right. Archon Studios make a bunch of quite cheap plastic dragons. They're all between like 25 and 35 pounds. They're really nice miniatures. They stand really tall and they're really well detailed. Now, obviously, I need a rider for the Chaos Dragon. And I'm using the rider from Abraxia's Ever Chosen. So I chopped the saddle from this miniature and then used green stuff to convert them together. And then I printed and stuck it to a new square base. You're not really bothered about conversion I'm doing. What you're interested in is seeing the new Wave 2 of P3. Now, Steamforged Games were very kind to send me a small handful of different paints, about 20, I think. So with the paints that I had been given, I wanted to see what they looked like. So I made myself a little swatching board and I'm super gluing grey knight heads, just some random bits. And then once I primed it using standard grey by the Colour Forge, I gave them a quick dry brush using Morrow white and then just applied a very normal layer. I'd put it on my wet palette and then applied it to each head individually, each colour one at a time. Bronze back brown is definitely like a lovely maroon colour. Tainted vein, very nice. It's going to be like good for like gums and stuff like that. Dark rune red, gorgeous colour, lovely red. Cinder Spark, absolutely supreme bright red. And then Infernal Red, it looks even brighter on camera, but it's definitely like a really desaturated red to where it's more like an orange. It is a very, very nice colour, but it's definitely orange. Obviously, with the new paint range, whilst these aren't final bottles, obviously they've got fairly basic labels on. I wanted to see how they acted on the brush. So I swatched out all 21 paints that they managed to send me. There is actually 64 colours to the full range of Wave 2. They had Wave 1, which is kind of like recreating the old range, but Wave 2 is all about expanding that paint range. Not too large, not unwieldy, but just like filling those gaps where it feels like they're kind of missing stuff. And one thing I will say about Wave 1 is that the metallics are quite lacking. There's only 12 metallics as part of the Wave 2 campaign. Their words, I quote, "As we speak, we're about to complete development on a premium collection of metallics so impossibly shiny, even we can't quite believe they're real. The metallics use a brand new pigment flake that, to the best of our knowledge, has never been used in hobby paint. In a specialized process, the aluminium flakes are dyed, crushed, and sealed inside a polymer so they don't gas. And because the dye is sealed inside the polymer, the pigment doesn't lose its shine as the paint dries, locking in that superior luster." I'm very interested to see how their metallics act very differently compared to their own range or other ranges. However, as I mentioned, with the 21 colours, we've got like a nice little range. We've got some nice reds, some nice greens, some nice blues, and then some odds and sods colours. I am going to be mixing with Wave 1, but I'll try and make it clear on screen when I'm using which. So starting out, what I use P3 paints for, I'm not going to sit here and be like, these are insane for wet blending and freehanding, because that's not stuff I do a lot. What I do a lot is a lot of dry brushing, a lot of air brushing, and a lot of mixing, which is quite crucial. So starting off with this dragon, we've primed it using Colour Forge Matte Black. So I went in initially with grey coat grey over black. And the nice thing about P3 paints is, especially on Wave 1, the finished product, they have the name of it on the front, but then on the side, they have like what the paint is. For example, this one says strong dark brown grey. So I started initially with grey coat grey to go through and highlight all of the dragon, because we are actually going to be airbrushing the dragon. I'm going for the classic Chaos Dragon, heavily inspired by Pete the Wargamers that he did a few years ago. But I wanted to dry brush it initially, working our way up to grey Lord. And this is just to kind of like bring out the details so I know when I'm airbrushing, I've applied the paint nicely, I've got a good coverage. It'll let me see like the highlights as I'm spraying. You know, like you do Zenithal all, I'm doing that but dry brushing. New super duper slap chop. It's dry brushing and then airbrush. It's never been done before. And then afterwards, I add in a little bit of Morrow white just to do the final highlight. And then because I'm airbrushing, I'm going to have to get my old gross mat out, which I've just thrown away once. So then this is where I get to start using the actual new waves. I started out with dark rune red, which, like I said, if you know me, I love a deep maroon red. It's just Bloodraven's color. I love it to bits. But I started out with that to do an initial base coat, to cover the red, to see where the model's details were, to see where the shadows are going to be, to see where the highlights were, and just get that first deep base coat down. And I will say that these colors airbrush like absolutely fantastically. They have really good coverage even when thinned down. I believe the technical term, as a better painter than me would say, is like heavy-bodied acrylics. I don't know these terminologies. I'm just a guy who likes to paint models. They act like thick paints, if that makes sense. Even when I thinned it down to airbrush, and the paints aren't like thick in the pot, but I think like creamy. It's very heavy in the pot, and you can feel when you're applying the paint that they go on really nicely. It's not one of those where it's like one coat and done, but they just apply so much better. It's not a 6 coat and done. It is a 1 or 2 coats and done, if that makes sense. I've thinned the paint, but it's not diluted, if that makes sense. So then I'm starting using cephalic shades. We're going to be airbrushing like the wings and the hands and the extremities purple, because we're going to go from a red to a purple to a blue. And I've only done the basic red initially, and then I'm already going on to the blending of the other colors. Obviously, because we're airbrushing all this, I don't want to like overspray like blues and purples onto the really high reds. I'm going to go back and do the red properly afterwards. But as you can see, even whilst I'm airbrushing, you can get this like glazing effect because the colors going on really thin. The saturation of the color is not lost. It's not when you thin down paints, right, in an airbrush, you spray it, you get like a really thin coat, and you can glaze obviously, but like on certain colors, it doesn't really like apply the saturation of the color on anything. Whereas this, even with one coat, you can see that it's a really nice purple already. And as I'm adding more layers, we're building up to the color that like we're trying to get to. It's just blending so nice. I'm not going to sit here and say this is the best paint ever, even if this is a sponsored video. A lot of paints feel very similar, but this one just feels like you can do that easier. It feels like you can do these glazes quicker and faster because of how heavy bodied acrylic and creamy the paint is. So then, as I mentioned, something I do a lot is mixing colors, especially when I'm airbrushing, because I want to get like smooth gradients. Because of like the way the paint acts, you don't need to do this too much, but I did add in some twilight blue to start doing those extremities and the wings as well. So I don't tend to wash the cup when I'm trying to do like blends and stuff like that. I tend to like get rid of most of the paint and then add the new paint in. When you mix it in the cup with that water, it mixes the purple that we've just used into the blue, and it gives us our like a nice mid-tone. But again, because you're able to like airbrush it and apply it quite thinly, and because it does go on really saturated, it blends really, really nicely, as you can see, from the deep red to the purple to now the blue. Even though they are on like a similar color wheel and they're going to blend quite nicely already, it's not like a stark difference, which is what we want. So all of the blending that I'm doing, obviously the main body is going to be red, but then the extremities and the skin of the wings, like the membrane, is going to be like this blue purple color. Then moving back to wave 1 to use Rune Shot to add the extreme highlights. Again, just keeping the same colors in that mixture in the pot and just mixing them together. And we're just like slowly building these highlights, aiming towards more of the extremities, because we want the ends of the fingers and the tail and stuff like that to be extremely light blue, and we want the blending to go down to light to dark to purple to red. And now we've established that blue to purple tone, we can go back to the reds and focus on getting that really, really bright red without compromising it by accidentally spraying purple or blues onto there. They're going to be a lot easier to fix than the actual main red. So we're going in with the Amethyst Rose, again from wave 1. And then this is where we're going to start applying those really high saturated reds. And I'm very excited to use Cinder Spark from wave 2. Amethyst Road is like a nice, not a deep red, but it's like a full red. I don't know how to describe paint colors. Dark Rune Red wasn't heavily saturated. It's a very nice shadow. Amethyst Rose, it's got like the more of the saturation in there, which is what we want for a mid-tone, because after we've applied this, we're going to start using that Cinder Spark from wave 2. And this is just like, there's red. You thought you had red? Here's a real red. This goes on so smoothly, so nicely, and you can see as we go around and just highlighting all the extremities, like the head and stuff like that. This is now a very, very bright red dragon, which is what we're going for. It is not a pink guinea pig that we're painting, it's a red dragon. Now, the issue with airbrushing a dragon with this much detail is because we're spraying the paint, all of the shadows have a similar saturation, a similar brightness, which obviously just makes the model look quite flat. So I'm going in with a blue, black, purple wash all over just to deepen down the recesses and blend those colors together as well, and just like darken the shadows. Because it's bright red and then bright blue, it does look a little stark, which is kind of what's nice about the paints, is because they're so bright. Because I've used the airbrush, all the shadows are really light and we want them to be darker. But the problem was I probably applied the wash way too thick, so our bright dragon has gone to very dull dark dragon. So this is what you call being dumb. I'm going to build up these colors again, but not this time using the airbrush. I'm going to retain those shadows that I have forced onto this dragon, and we're going to start like building the tones back up using dry brushing once again. And again, because we've got so much texture on this model, dry brushing is like a really good option. So I initially start on dry brushing with dark green red, and it's a bit of a scam calling it dry brushing these days. If you take the paint, you get it on your brush, and then you put it on a piece of paper towel and dry brush it off, you get dry brushing. And dry brushing is not the best way to paint miniatures. It's really easy to paint terrain and stuff like that. It's really quick. It becomes quite chalky because what you're essentially doing is you're putting the paint on your brush and then you're whapping it on some paper towel or whatever, getting rid of all of the binder, essentially all of the moisture out of the brush, out of the paint, sorry. And then what you're retaining on the brush is all of the pigment. So when I say dry brushing, I'm actually wetting the brush first and then doing the similar motion on a dry palette, for example, like a piece of MDF that's got texture in it, or I'm putting it on the paper towel but trying to put it on a wet part of a paper towel. So I'm just essentially removing a lot of the paint, but I'm not just removing the moisture from the brush. And what that gives us is a much smoother way to do it. But you have to be careful, because if you water the paintbrush down too much, you're just painting. You've got to kind of try to find this balance of wetting the brush and then drying the brush off. The biggest trick I can say is when I wet the brush, I dry the brush on the paper towel, but then when I whack the paint off onto the paper towel, I do it into the moisture. I do it into the wet part of the paper towel I've just had, and that kind of like keeps that moisture on in the paint but doesn't completely dry it out. As you can see, like even just like dry brushing with these paints is that they're not really giving that chalky effect. Because when we're trying out this technique, you know, don't get me wrong, we're building from dark green red to amethyst rose and then going back up to cinder spark, our brightest red from wave 2, which is such a gorgeous red. It's just blood red all over. It's so nice. And then moving on to twilight blue to do similar, to build the blues up on the wings and the hands and stuff like that. It just applies really, really nicely. Once I'm pretty happy with the color and the shade and the tone of the dragon, I am going to go in and highlight all the scales. And this is a bit of a slog, but it's essentially cinder spark and infernal red mixed together. The cinder spark gives us that like real high pop, that really high punch, the blood red color that we want the dragon, but infernal red gives us that brightness back into the color. And then I'm just working my way down the extremities. I'm highlighting with the purples, like a mixture. This model is covered in texture. It's a really nice miniature. It's covered in detail. We need to highlight them to make them stand out. And you might notice whilst highlighting the red, the dragon suddenly went from very satin and very bright to very matte, because I was actually trying out P3's new matte varnish. Really, really nice, easy to use varnish. Very, very matte, like extremely matte, which is quite nice. Essentially like the different finishes. You've got glossy, satin and matte, if you've heard of those three. Glossy makes the miniature on the surface very smooth, which is great for applying washes. So when it's glossy, it's like painting onto glass. It's not obviously not quite the same, but it's very similar. Whereas matte is completely the other end to deflect the light and stop the light shining off it. It's like a really quite rough texture. If you are like trying to paint and you've painted loads of washes over it, or you've been holding it with your fingers too much and you've got like lots of grease on it, or just the paint's not applying very well, it's kind of like bubbling up a little bit, like water and oil not mixing together. What you can do is apply matte varnish. You can't see it, but it gives it a rougher texture, so it's a lot easier to paint and just covers up any oils and stuff that you might have got with your fingers. And it's also like a nice save point, I like to think. It's like what I can do is varnish it and then it's protected. I've done that bit, we can move on. God, maybe I am a painter. Maybe I do know what's going on. But with that, the dragon is basically done. There's a couple of details like the tongue, the saddle, etc. But the main part of the dragon is finished. Moving on to using the metallics. Now, obviously, I don't have any of the new metallics, but this video is turning into a bit of a trying out wave 1, looking at wave 2. So we're using the silvers. We've got boiler black, cold steel, and quicksilver. Metallics are a bit of a funny one with dry brushing. They can either be really good for dry brushing, and you can like really get lots of like a nice texture, or they are way too full of medium, where they're great for like painting and edge highlighting, but not for like base coating. And these are just like really, really nice silvers. They're very limited. There's only 3 silvers. There's 4 silvers. I missed out pig iron, which is a nice color as well, to be fair. But these are like really, really nice bright silvers. They apply really, really well. They come off the brush really nicely, and they blend really nicely with this dry brushing technique. And then I'm using like a dirty brown wash all over the miniature to deepen the recesses, and just generally like mucking the armor up because we don't want him looking too clean, because he is a Chaos Lord of the Ashen Wasteland. He doesn't come out with shiny armor. He's literally got holes in his cape. And then once that's dried, I'm just going over with Quicksilver once again to give it that final edge highlight with a dry brush. And then it's the time to apply some golds. Now, again, the golds in Wave 1 are really nice colors, to be fair. There's 4 golds. There's Molten Bronze, Rulic Gold, Bronze Badge, and Solid Gold. And Solid Gold's your brightest. The paints apply really, really well. Companies don't always get metallics right. Some of them do. One of them being P3, and others do as well. Again, I'm not here to say this is the best paint range ever, but I will say it's a very enjoyable paint range to use. And I think the one thing that's nice about the P3 range, which is not the same for every paint range again, is that all the paints, they all feel very consistent between each other. Now, I've been using these for quite a while. I'm using for a good few months. I've painted quite a few miniatures with them now. You can use the black, the coal black that everyone sings some skyscrapers about, and it's like the best paint that's ever existed ever. It will literally bring the passing of Christ again. But you could use coal black, you could use basilisk brown, bane grey. It doesn't matter what color it is, they all feel super consistent with each other. They all act the same, rather than like blacks being really nice to use, and then you go to like the yellows and it's like, oh, it's okay, but you have to apply white first, you have to apply 17 layers. I didn't really find that with any of these paints, which is really refreshing. So anyway, once I'd worked on the metallics, I'd done the gold, I'd give them another wash, a quick highlight, etc. I wanted to try this blend in, because one thing that everyone said in Wave 1 was that these were insane to blend, and it's not something that I do a whole bunch. But I'm going to try blending this cloak. And normally for a cloak like this, I would probably just airbrush it, because I just find it easier. I just find airbrushing really quick and really simple. But I wanted to try out blending on a model, and not a wet blend, just some sort of blend. So the 3 colors I used were Blackwater Sand as our base coat, and then I worked my way up through Jack Bone to Sickly Skin. So I wanted like an off-white cape. I'd normally go for a red cape, but I've got a red dragon, so it felt weird to go for a red cape. I'm using quite a large brush. This is just a makeup brush. What I'm essentially doing is I'm like trying to mix the colors on the cape. So I'm starting with my base coat, and then I'm applying a little bit more base coat once it's already dried, and then adding in the highlight, the lighter color, and trying to like smooth them together. And I'm trying to get like a rough texture, because I want it to look like a scraggy cape, because this is a regal warrior of the 34th millennium or whatever. It's a cape that he's had forever, and he's a bit of an angry dude. So I want it to look a little scratchy, and I'm trying to do that with the paint, trying to like blend the colors together, because it's still a little bit wet on the model. And again, this creamy terminology that people use, it's not a paint that dries really quickly. So what I can do is I can apply that layer, quite scratchy, and then start applying like a lighter color straight away on the back of the cape, and start blending the scratchiness together. So I'm kind of like getting scratchy lines. It's kind of like a dry brushing technique. I love dry brushing. I don't normally dry brush this much, honestly, but it's like a similar to dry brushing technique, but the paint is just off the palette. I'm not really like getting rid of everything. I'm just applying it to the cape, and then before it's finished drying, I'm applying a lighter color. It's like dragging all the pigment together, I guess, and it's just kind of like making this scratchy line effect, so it looks really nice for like a nice tattered cape, you know. And then I'm just going in with Sickly Skin and Menoth White mixed together, just applying a couple of highlights just to brighten it up. We got this dirty cloak now. The shadows are really dirty. It goes out to white, and we're just going to highlight those edges to really bring out the tones. So then part of the colors that I've not used from Wave 2 with the green, so I wanted to give the guy a jade weapon. Again, I'd normally go for red, or I'd go for like lava here or something like that with the texture of the miniature. Because I've got so many red already, I want like the rider to emote some different colors. So I went with Kithgard Camo initially, which is like a deep jade. Again, just a really, really, really nice blue, green, turquoisey color. And then I'm not really going to apply any washes to this, so I'm using Tassel Worm, which is just a really cool name. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it's supposed to be. Just such a nice, like straight up highlight to that color, like a really nice little duo of colors that go together really nicely. And I'm just like highlighting the edges quite thick. I'm not like trying to do like extreme edge highlights, but as I'm adding more lighter and lighter colors, I'm going to like tighten those highlight and edges to make it even brighter and make the highlights more intense, as it were. So then I've added a little bit of white into the tassel worm just to make a lighter color. There's our triad. We're doing edge highlights now. We're following all the cracks, the edge of the weapon, all the cracks and stuff like that, and just like trying to bring it together and make it look like it's a weird jade stone thing. So magical, mysterious weapon material that no one knows, but it looks cool because it contrasts really nicely. You got like the greeny blue hues, which contrast well with like the red dragon, which is really nice. So finally, I want to do a little bit more airbrushing. I wanted to do some object source lighting. I wanted to add a little pop of color on the weapon. The rider itself was looking a little dull. It's very yellow, so I wanted to add some like contrasting colors. So I ended up watering down Morrow white and like using it almost like an ink. And as you can see, even though I've watered it down loads and it's really, really wet, it's going into those recesses and still applying the color really nicely. As I said, the nice thing about these, you can thin them really, really thin. So they're almost acting like washers almost, but the color is still being applied really nicely. And it's not just like water. So then I'm airbrushing all the stone weapon. The jade weapon has some like rune markings in and the fire and stuff. I'm just going to go in with some orange, which is like such a cool color because you can apply it really thin and it goes yellow. The more you apply, the thicker you do the layer, it goes orange. So I actually do most of this using one color where it's like I'm spraying onto the cape to make the object source lighting look like it's lighting the cape. And then I apply like a thicker coat to like the lettering and the flame. A really interesting color because it's called Strong Shadow Orange, but the thinner you apply it, it just does look yellow. I've never really experienced that with like a yellow or an orange before, where it's kind of like come out and it's like two colors in one almost. That is the best paint in the world. And I use the same color for the dragon eyes. I wanted the dragon eyes to look like magical. I wanted to look angry and stuff like that. And then I just kept applying like thicker and thicker coats, so we got that orange. And now the orange does look a little bit desaturated, so I end up adding in some dragon fire orange from wave 2 to bring out like the depth and the saturation once again. And then for the eyes, I just used some Spellstorm, which I really like the name of that wave 2 paint, Spellstorm. Sure, should make a channel that sounds like that. And then for the base of this miniature, I wasn't sure how I was going to base it, but I actually asked my Parasocial Gang members, which is one of my higher tiers of members, where they get the exclusive WhatsApp groups, behind the scene access to all the stuff that I'm up to. So you can join by clicking join down below. Really appreciate it. They suggested doing a snow base. So I mixed some bicarbonate soda and some water effect mixed together and applied that all over the base and made it look quite natural. And then when I'd finished, I sprinkled some bicarbonate on top. If you apply water effects, it looks like melted snow, but then when it's drying, just sprinkle some on top and it looks like powder snow again, which is quite cool. And then once I painted the edge of the base black, we had ourselves a brand new Chaos Dragon for the Old World painted in P3 paints. And then do the cool display shots. So there it is, a absolutely stunning miniature, a really cool conversion that I'm really happy with, but also a really fun painting experiment, trying out a paint range I've not really used before. A lot of dry brushing, it turns out, but also just trying out quite a few new techniques to paint this guy up and try out different colors that I wouldn't normally use before. And I think it came out really well, and the P3 paints definitely helped out quite a lot. And it's not the only miniatures I've painted with P3 paints. I've actually painted up a Mutely Vortex Beast for my Thousand Suns army, which I painted months ago, which you might have seen. That was also painted using P3 paints exclusively. And I actually did a huge collaboration with a channel known as Dark Souls Models, where I painted up Pontiff Sullivan from Dark Souls 3, a miniature that they sent over. This was using Wave 1, again, a few months ago. This was like really fun to paint. I had to do like loads of blending for the cloaks and stuff like that. OSL to do with like the swords. But they were doing a huge collaboration to celebrate the launch of Elden Ring Night Rain. Obviously, I'm a huge Elden Ring fan. I have all of Steamforged Games Elden Ring down on the floor down there in my cupboard. It's like a huge collab with loads and loads of different YouTubers, which was like really, really fun to be a part of. And when this video goes live, they should be launching their own video where they've had all those different YouTubers paint a different character or boss to make this humongous diorama. And I was very lucky that they showed it me early. I think that's the sound it makes. Hello, Mr. Dark Souls.
Hello, Mr. Hellstorm.
I'm very excited to see what you've been cooking.
Well, you're actually very lucky because genuinely finished it 5 hours ago.
Oh, no way.
Do you want a little reveal?
Please do the honors. Oh my God. It's gone sideways. There is so much going on.
Let's zoom in on this fella.
There he is.
Look at this guy.
Look at him. Pride of place in the middle.
And then is against
Against...
That's the fight everyone wants, isn't it? I've spent so long doing all of this. I still haven't even downloaded Night Rain yet.
Oh, mate, no! No! You must be so chuffed.
I'm actually just more happy that I don't have to do anything with it anymore. Like, it's just done. This is something that's been going on for 5 months.
If you haven't already, go and click the link in the description and go see Dark Souls Models videos. The big question that you're asking me, Mikey, is P3 the best paint on the market that you should buy? Is P3 going to make you a better painter? And sadly, the answer is no. No, it's not going to make you a better painter. But what this paint has allowed me to do is try different techniques that I don't normally do, like blending and stuff like that. Now, there's a lot of paint ranges out there, and I don't think there is a perfect paint range, but I did really enjoy using this one. And like I said, this video is sponsored by Steamforged Games. Love you, Steamforged. But I did really like this product, and I don't really like promoting products that I don't use. P3 paints, the nice thing about it, as I've already mentioned, is the consistency across the range. Every paint acted in a very similar way. It wasn't like, oh, with this paint, I've got to do something slightly differently. I've got to do more coats than normal. The thickness was very similar. They had that creamy consistency. They just felt really consistent, and that's kind of what you want when you're trying to paint an army. You don't want to dread doing that one bit because one paint didn't act quite right. I have only tried out 21 of the full 64 color range that is coming out to Wave 2. And again, take everything I say with a pinch of salt. This video is sponsored. But speaking of, thank you very much, Steamforged Games, for sponsoring this video. Thank you to my members who help make videos like this possible. I really couldn't do it without you. And if you like this video and you like this sort of content, let me know down in the comments. And while on your way, click like. So thank you, appreciate you, and hopefully I'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye!